Peak Book Club, Chapter 4, The Gold Standard. This one was a doozy. I actually found this to be very interesting. So I can't remember. I didn't leave us with any questions at the end of last week, did I?
No, last week was kind of weird because of the whole bathroom thing and the noise and stuff. So it was really hard to do.
Yeah. Right. Last week was a disaster. This week, hopefully, will go much better. So let's get right into it. So the chapter opens with a bit on kind of musical performance of the violin and the piano. Musical training is known to be one of the best structured programs in the world. People who've been doing music for a very long time. There's pretty well accepted understandings of what music is supposed to sound like, etc., etc. So the authors assert that it is one of the best fields that you could study if you were trying to learn about practice, because people practice music all the time. There's in fact, Two Set Violin, shout out to them, have shirts that you can buy that look like Supreme shirts, but instead of Supreme, they say practice. And I bought one, and it's fantastic. So, the authors studied the connections between musicians' motivations and how those affected how much they practiced, in particular, trying to predict how much they actually would achieve and go on to achieve. So, they formed 4 groups of 10. Random students, likely to end up as music teachers, which they labeled good. Not quite top students, but almost there, which they labeled betters. People that the professors of the music school identified as being like elite in waiting, right? Like probably would go on to be international level, those being best. And then 10 musicians from the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra. So actively practicing professionals, with the idea being that those would be perhaps a look into what the elite might look like in the future. They did a bunch of interviews to try to suss out the musicians' motivations and also kind of how long they had practiced up until this particular point. They found that the average age to start practicing was around age 8. And from doing the interviews and talking about practice and what the students thought was most important, far and away, they reported that solo practice was the most important thing in the most important factor in their improvement. Just behind that, things like group practice, taking lessons, performing, particularly solo, listening to music, studying theory, and surprisingly enough sleep, right? A lot of people said, if I don't get my sleep, I'm doomed, and so I will often sleep 8 hours and then also have a nap in the afternoon, which...
Fucking relatable.
Right? It's like, geez, gimme, I want it, right? Oh boy.
Yeah, I can't count the number of times people have asked me, but why do you take so many naps? You already sleep so much. Because
right?
I'm exhausted.
Because I actually use my brain, unlike the other half of the person in this conversation. XD. So, I thought it was really interesting, actually, this kind of whole breakdown. And I kind of wanted to talk about, what does this seem to say? How could we relate, these sorts of activities to, league activities, right? I think a lot of what you'll get is solo practice ends up being kind of solo cue, right?
Yeah.
Because, but I think, it kind of...
Actually, no.
No.
Solo practice would be solo queue and like your own like drilling environment by yourself. Like
that's the thing that I think is interesting, right? Is that solo queue is kind of solo practice, but for a lot of people, it's actually closer to performing.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I would say it's actually performing solo, and then solo practice is what you take away from the solo queue game.
Yeah.
And after that, the drilling or the stuff you do in the training tool would add to the solo practice.
Yeah, it's like this is your reviews actually, right? It's not actually your games. It's the time that you spend actually learning stuff from your games by doing reviews, by doing journaling, by doing mental hand histories, all that kind of stuff that's actually going to help you to get better at the game.
Exactly.
Group practice being obviously, you could count that as like scrims, right? For somebody who is on a team. Lessons, obviously, coaching sessions. Performing, depending on what kind of a player you are, right? You might define performing as playing solo queue, or you might define performing as tournament play, right?
Yeah.
Or if you're LCS, then it might be LCS, right?
Yeah, I would say it's the highest stakes that you can play in is co-performing. So for most of us, it's solo queue because
for most people, it's solo queue. For people who have something else, immediately you'll notice, right? Like pro players don't really care how they do in solo queue. You know what I mean? Like you look at how Tarzan reacts when he loses a lane versus how Sneaky reacts when he loses a lane. It's like, there's a reason for that, right?
I think partially it's also the fact that stakes for someone like Sneaky is much lower, right? Because he's on Cloud 9, right? So it's like
that's what I'm saying.
It's like
that's exactly what we're saying.
Yeah, it's precisely that, right?
Perfect agreement.
So, then listening to music, I actually think this comes down to like VOD watching, actually, right? It's like watching other people, or whatever it is. It's observing other people play.
I would say this is like passively watching, though.
Yes. Agreed. It's not studying. It's just like listening.
Studying your VOD is solo practice.
Yeah, true. This is like watching streams, basically. This listening to music. I'm saying like listening to music is the music equivalent of watching a stream for League.
I have a lot of disagreements with that, if only because when I was in graduate school, one of my assignments weekly was listening to different recordings of music and then really trying to hammer out the interpretive choices they made on my own, and then taking it to a group, and then we chat about it and why we think they made that interpretive choice. And so it's like definitely more like a VOD review in that sense, but like also it can be like a stream too. So it's like it depends on your goal there, I think.
Yeah. You can watch streams to improve. You could watch streams to analyze them and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I think that captures kind of the same sort of thing, right? It's the idea is observing others doing the activity as opposed to doing the activity yourself in some kind of a way.
Yeah, and my point was that if you're like passively watching, just watching with the flow and never interrupting it, is like the same thing as like listening to music passively. But when you're actually like taking the time to break it down, slow it down, or stop it and rewind, then it becomes it's actually studying in detail. Would you agree with that, Morgan?
Well, to an extent, the problem with that is that analogy is that like music is inherently a very physical activity, and that you have to be able to move your fingers and do the right thing. So it's like you won't necessarily learn how to play the piece from listening to it. You'll be able to really glean the choices they make when they play a piece. But I suppose that's sort of the same thing with League, although League is much less physical in that sense. So you can learn a lot more, I think.
Oh, yeah, League is much more binary. Do you press the key or do you not press it? Right?
Yeah, you're not gonna learn a combo by watching somebody do it. Although you can use watching them as
I guess.
Yeah, you can learn that the combo exists, and similarly, you can learn that a musical interpretation exists by listening to it for the first time. So, right? So certainly there are a lot of ways to watch streams, and there are a lot of ways to listen to music. And I think that, you can find parallels for almost any kind of an interpretation of it, which is, I think, might make a good parallel. Studying theory, pretty clear. You don't even need to change the words. It's literally just the same thing, right?
Yep.
And then, obviously, I think enough sleep actually has at least for me, I have noticed that it makes a big difference on my ability to do well in League 2, because not only does it have, an impact on your actual physical alertness, but also it has a huge impact on my mood. I don't know about the rest of you, but when I'm tired, I get tilted so easily. Oh my goodness. It just wrecks my mental resilience.
I have dabbled in sleep deprivation enough to wholeheartedly confirm this.
It's pretty important. So that's why I spent all that time getting my sleep in order. I'm telling you, it's worth it. It's good stuff. Anyway. And this, I think, is maybe one of the most interesting points of the whole thing.
Yeah, same.
Nobody liked to practice. Not a single one of them said that they just love practicing the violin. It was instead that they were motivated to do so because they saw it as essential to improving their performance. So, this draws kind of a nice, clear connection between, goals and performance, right? If you don't have goals, you're very unlikely to have motivation. If you don't have motivation, you're very unlikely to practice. Therefore, if you don't have goals, you're very unlikely to practice, because practice is not inherently fun.
Fuck no.
So, do y'all have thoughts on this? I feel like there should be something here, right?
Well, we kind of even started the conversation with Morbite earlier on this, right?
Did we? Go over it again for me. Just remind me what it was that was said so far.
Wait, let me just literally
for the benefit of me and any viewers who do not actually live in our server.
Good point. So we were discussing the article, well, still going to be obscure to people outside, the article that Cyclone linked about, but that said, we do the most learning when we are in our comfort zone, because that's where the that's where our neural pathways are most concentrated, to use their exact words.
Yes.
And I was disagreeing with that because of how getting out of your comfort zone enables learning. And Morbite said that his interpretation was that it was the emotional comfort zone, that we should always be feeling good when we are aiming to learn. And so practice doesn't feel good to me. And it's definitely not my emotional comfort zone.
Well, when I said emotional comfort zone, I didn't mean oh, you're not allowed to be bored or whatever, right? Like, being bored is totally fine, but I mean going out of your comfort zone is in terms of you feel, obviously you're going to feel a bit of friction, right? But you shouldn't feel bad about the fact that you feel friction.
Yeah, because it seems kind of like to me a similar sort of thing to feeling the burn in exercise, right? Like, if you don't feel anything, you are not working hard enough, right? You're not outside of homeostasis, right? But if you're dying, Squirtle, then you're probably injuring yourself. You know what I mean? So that's this idea of the Goldilocks zone, right? It's like you want to be a little bit outside of your comfort zone so that you can actually learn something. Yeah. But you don't want to be so far outside that you're
impossible, right?
that you're emotionally compromised, your brain is shutting down, you're not able to do anything. That then is extremely unproductive.
Right, which is
it must be a balance.
Which would be me being in silver and having to plague into diamond one mid laner or something.
Yeah, exactly. That's not going to be educational. That's going to be upsetting. This is why matchmaking is important.
Right, because against that player, no matter what you do, you're just losing, right? So it's what? I don't even know what to do. This guy just doesn't even let me play the game.
Yeah. Walks in front of your minion line at level 2, and you're just guess I'll die. It's okay.
Practice is about experiencing mild discomfort.
Yes, mild discomfort, and I think a lot of people, I think there's a lot of people that go too hard in both directions, right? There's a lot of people who go super duper hard and they're just like, of course it's painful, and then they just like grit their teeth and they just keep going, right? Shout out to Day 9, by the way. And then there are other people who just kind of aren't even comfortable with mild discomfort, right? And they'll get kind of stuck doing kind of the same sort of thing and not really ever put in the effort to try to push past that, try to do something that is a little uncomfortable, right? It's like nobody wants to be uncomfortable. You have to want something enough to be uncomfortable in pursuit of it, right? And that's kind of where motivation comes in as like an essential part of purposeful practice and deliberate practice. It's what gets you to feel okay about feeling uncomfortable during practice. Because you start thinking about that thing that you want, goal that you have, and that's what gives you the energy to fuel your willpower to continue to do the thing, right? So,
to be honest, this is just the entire shonen genre in a nutshell.
Damn, you right. Agreed.
That's just every shonen hero ever.
Yeah. Have you seen Hunter x Hunter?
I want things more than and so I can take the pain, and then super music, and then they win.
Yeah. Then super music, and then they win. Yeah, you right. Agreed. Yes, that's hilarious.
Basically, My Hero Academia, where he just like breaks his bones every time.
Yeah. He's like, I will break my hand. And everyone's like, you don't have to do that. He's like, I will break my hand!
It's like liar. He's like kicking his own ass in the bathroom, and when somebody comes in, they're like, what the hell? And he's like, I'm kicking my ass, do you mind? And then he just like runs away.
Anime is good. God bless anime, honestly. So, yeah. Nobody likes to practice, but it shouldn't feel like death. It should feel mildly discomforting. You should feel the burn, metaphorically. I've had a lot of students who said, once they kind of grasped what it meant to get outside of their comfort zone, and like they went from playing like 10 games a day to playing like 2 games a day, because they're like, holy shit, after 2 games I am tired. That is hard work. And I'm like, yes, that's how it should feel. You know what I mean? Like, so if, I would say that's like a risk factor, right? Like, if you find yourself, without having consciously trained to do it, playing like, 6 to 10 games a day, and you're having trouble improving, it might be that you're not focusing enough. Right? And you're not getting far enough outside of your comfort zone to actually learn stuff, right? In which case, remedying that will not only help you to improve, but it'll also drastically reduce the number of games that you want to play, because it'll just be like, geez, like 3 games in, you're exhausted, right? You feel really tired.
Yeah, right. Today, for example, I could not play more than 2 games in a row, so I played like 6 games in the entire day while having like no other things planned.
Yeah, no other applications. And you look at like pro players, right? They're not playing 12 games a day. They're playing like, they're playing like 6 Scrimlocks, and then solo queue is kind of seen as like, we're not going to try to really learn. We're just kind of like blown off steam.
Solo queue is kind of like you learn, you just
Solo queue is going through the motions.
Yeah.
For them.
It's going through the motions. It's like tossing the ball around,
Solo queue to like refine mechanics and stuff, whereas scrims are for like the actual learning.
Yes. Yeah. It's mechanical.
It doesn't make sense there. It doesn't make sense to go into a scrim not knowing how to play a champion, right? So you go and fucking play it with you get your solo queues.
Exactly. Yep. So yeah. So there was only one major difference that the authors found between the different groups, the good, the better, the best, and the future groups. And that was amount of time devoted to solitary practice. So they had the students estimate the hours that they had practiced by the age of 18, and then compared across these different groups. And what you find is that by age 18, the good students that were likely to go on to become music teachers had, on average, practiced 3,420 hours by the age of 18, which, if you include the fact that they started at age 8, and you kind of do the math, that comes out to roughly an hour a day of practice. 0.936 hours of daily solo practice, assuming 0 missed days, right? When you look at the students that ended up being in the better group, they had 5,301 average hours by age 18. I'm doing the thing.
Oh, okay.
5,301 hours practiced by age 18, which averages out to about an hour and 45 minutes of solo practice per day. And then when you look at the best students, the ones that were pretty much going to be heading on to become international stars, they had 7,410 hours practiced by age 18, which works out to just about exactly 2 hours daily solo practice. The professionals, working professionals, actually ended up with a little bit less than that, clocking in at 7,336 hours, and also just about 2 hours of daily solo practice.
Yeah, I would just put the difference in, like, attribute the difference to variance, to be honest.
Yeah. No, it's essentially the same.
Especially because the groups are 10 people, so, like...
Yeah, no joke.
Sample size memes.
Yeah. 1 second. I'm going to ask my dad to maybe not vacuum while I'm doing this.
An idea.
Hey, Dad! Hey, Dad!
Could you fucking not?
Hey! Hey! Did you not do that while I'm recording a video? If I pause this? Maybe. Yeah, give it a shot. Okay? Yes! Well, I can't get him to stop vacuuming, but I can get him to close the door. Hopefully that's not too bad.
Yeah, it is. We can't hear it now.
Okay, good. So, they also mentioned that there were no prodigies in the traditional sense. Nobody got to where they were without appropriate levels of practice. There was a very strong correlation between ability and hours practiced. Right? So this implies a couple of things, right? If you are a musician or working in a
About tree fitty. Yeah, no, it's pretty much completely spot on. The people who really excelled were the people who you'd always find in the practice room for 5-6 hours a day, really just trying to hammer away and refine, refine, and refine. People who struggled and complained tended to be the people who kind of just socialized a lot with their friends, and then kind of skirted by, and a lot of those people would get really really frustrated and angry because I guess they felt jealous of the ones who worked really hard. And I was always one of the really driven ones up until my year at grad school because I couldn't deal with it anymore. But up until then, I was always, if the top one or the second to the top one in school. And a lot of people would always be like, "Hey, no, man, you're just talented," and I'm not. I mean, I just suck because I'm bad, right? That's why I'm just like, well, I wanted to slap him upside the face because I'm spending 4 or 5 more hours a day than you in the practice room. How dare you tell me that's because you're bad? You know what I mean? How dare you try to tell me that like my work isn't doing anything? I'm just good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
It happened a lot where it was just like, it really irks me. So I completely agree with what he said there.
Completely understandable and relatable.
Mm-hmm. So this brings us to the kind of definition of deliberate practice as opposed to purposeful practice, which is what we talked about last week. So, or maybe it was the week before. But either way, so deliberate practice requires a highly developed field in which experts and novices are clearly set apart from each other in terms of performance, and there are teachers or coaches that can provide practice activities designed to help improve performance. There are a couple of properties, highly developed fields. Usually there is an objective or semi-objective measure of performance. League of Legends totally fits this, right? You have stats like KDA, you have stats like kill participation, you have solo queue ranking, right? And these are reasonable measures of performance for any given individual. You need the field to be competitive enough to give motivation to practice and improve to the people who want to be at the top. It has to be, not dead simple to get there, right? We can all agree that League of Legends is pretty damn competitive, so certainly checks that box. It has to be well established. There has to have been lots of time devoted to developing learning and teaching methods, right? I think this is the thing that League of Legends kind of falls a little bit flat on, right? The game is very new, right? It's, in the cosmic sense, it's only been 10 years, right? And that's actually not a whole lot of time for people to figure out what methods end up producing the best results.
For sure. Like, it feels like chess, they're still trying to kind of figure out, like, how do we get somebody who's from a beginner to a grandmaster in, however long.
For sure.
They're getting much better at it, though, but yes, agree.
They are better at it than League people are, but obviously, because the game's much older, but it is still, it's not like music where there's a set out plan, like they actually have, the exact music you should work on depending on the system that usually takes you from being a very beginner to like intermediate, then they have like another set that take you to being a college level, and then the college level they know exactly which music's at which difficulty, and like with chess it's not like that because it's just so much more cognitive. Like people, I guess we don't understand we understand really well how to deliberately practice things that are more dexterous. I think
it also comes down to the fact that chess is a one-on-one thing, like a duel between two players. So when one, like where you just go up the Yomi ladder, the better you get, right?
Well, I mean that's true. But sports like tennis and any other 1v1 sport that's pretty well established also has really really good deliberate practice plans out there for you. Like, this is the order that you need to learn every skill.
So wait, your point is that wait, I'm not sure what your point is actually.
The point is that like something that's cognitive, like chess, is going to be much more difficult to figure out a really good deliberate practice plan than something that's more, movement based, like say tennis or
the fundamentals of chess are much subtler than the fundamentals of tennis. You know, like when you hit the ball versus miss the ball, or the ball goes where it's supposed to versus not going where it's supposed to. Those are like such unbelievably clear metrics and such unbelievably good metrics. You know, they really are excellent indicators of performance. That it's very easy to know whether a training method is going to work or not, and as a result, it's very easy to develop good training methods.
And the way I think about it in chess and League, it's like if you hang a pawn, you'll never know that you hang a pawn if the other people around you don't know how to punish a hanging pawn.
Yeah. And like, you know, maybe the only thing that you could get with that in tennis is like, you know, nobody ever hits to your backhand on purpose, you know, and so you like never figure out that it's like weaker than the rest of your swings or something like that. But like, you know, even that you can imagine how you're going to run across a weak backhand a lot easier than you're going to run across a hanging pawn. So
we as humans, and there's a new theory that's sort of bubbling around in certain circles where it's like, hey, actually, the reason our human brain is so big isn't because we can, you know, reason and communicate, but it's because the human body is specifically created for movement. Everything that we do is related to movement in some way, whether or not, like, when we think, our mouths move, like, very smallly. Like, whenever we think about an action, our brains tend out that same electrical signal, but weaker. So, like, they're starting to think that, hey, the brain is actually probably so big because we need to have so much more space for all the, you know, the movement actions that we have to take in life. And so, like, it makes sense if you think about it in that sense that, like, a movement-based sport like tennis would be so much easier to learn than chess, right? Because if our brains are all about saving movements in our, you know, myelination, then it makes a lot more sense that it would be much easier to learn things that we have to move for rather than things that we have to think about.
That makes sense to me.
Yep. I've read this similar things and I agree. We are kinetic species.
Yeah, it's a very new theory that came out in the last like 5 or 10 years, but it's something that I've really thought about a lot, and I really like kind of how I think about it, because I notice in my case that when I think about League in terms of like how I move my body, like the mechanic stuff comes really like instantly for me, but when it comes to the cognitive thing, like when do I punish, when do I do this, when do I do that, that's a lot slower for me because there's no like associated body movement with those things.
No, there isn't.
Well, yeah, and
other than like, you know, I have to move my mouth in a certain way, but
yeah, and even then it's going to be in a different certain way in like 8 different situations, and you're trying to map some kind of an abstract concept into eventually a movement, right? And it's like,
exactly.
You know, you're never doing anything other than moving the mouse and clicking, like. You know, I mean, that's literally the whole game, right? You know, so like, you know, I often like, you know, make fun of people trying to learn the game. Just like click better, forehead. Like, yeah, you know,
but then
that's your problem. Your problem is you're clicking wrong. You know, it's like, I mean, true, unhelpful, but true. You know,
and then you think about the whole movement, you know, sort of theory that they're coming up with, and it kind of makes sense that like maybe the problem isn't that we're not cognitively understanding, you know, that we need to do this at this point, it's that we're not able to translate that into the movement we need to make in that situation.
Yeah.
So like,
I've seen people with both problems, for sure.
Yeah.
And I've found that traditional coaching methods, like the ones that I originally kind of started working with, authors like Matt Thornton and W. Timothy Galway with, you know, I mean, like those essays and The Inner Game of Tennis, I found that those techniques tend to work really, really, really good for teaching low-level mechanical stuff to League players, which is something that, honestly, people have actually struggled to learn to teach in the community for a long time. I think that's actually something that isn't all that well known, right? Is that, like, it is possible to develop good mechanics in a player. It's actually dead simple. You just use the training methods that are generally used by traditional sports, and there you go, you're off to the races. But when you instead look at something like, you know, developing decision-making capabilities, that's a lot less physical and it's a lot less natural, right? You kind of got to do a little bit more deliberate work to make that kind of thing.
But at the same time, like, even if it's decision-making, you know, there's still the movements associated with how I need to move my mouse in those situations. There's very little situations in League specifically where, like, you're not moving anything. So I think for League specifically, it's both. But for something like TFT or chess, where it's like you literally all you do is you click on the
Make
thing
decisions,
and put
yeah.
it. Yeah,
It's completely abstract.
yeah, and so it makes it much harder.
I
I know League is.
I don't know harder, but it definitely makes it way different.
The fact that it's completely abstract doesn't remove the fact that there is definitely movement in how you build your mental models. I know for a fact that when I'm going through abstract mental models in my mind, I fucking draw with my hands, and it's an actual part of the like a required part of the thinking.
Hmm.
You know, when you're closing your eyes and you're trying to go down a deep line of thoughts, then I usually tend to move my hands and use them to keep track of what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. So this leads us to a quote. The authors say, with this definition, we are drawing a clear distinction between purposeful practice, in which a person tries very hard to push him or herself to improve, and practice that is both purposeful and informed. In particular, purposeful practice is informed and guided by the best performers' accomplishments, and by an understanding of what these expert performers do to excel. Deliberate practice is purposeful practice that knows where it is going and how to get there. So, this is kind of interesting, right? And I think what this perhaps indicates to me is that as a coach, I think one of the duties that I have been neglecting is I need to do a lot more watching of professional players and the best solo queue players. Because, you know, if my job is to be able to guide people to understand what it is that they should be trying to do, right? Then, you know, there's the technique of delivering the information, right? And that's certainly, you know, a whole branch, right? Like, you know, learning how to teach, right? But then in terms of the actual information that needs to be taught, you know, that's where you get it. You get it by watching ProVods and taking a look at what they're doing and seeing what the best performers have come up with, right? Because if you're able to understand what it is that they're doing, then that's what gives you the edge to, you know, do the best, right? And I think the thing that makes it so interesting is that for League, because there's so much of this counterplay or Yomi or whatever you want to call it, right? You get into this kind of state where it's maybe not exactly clear all of the time how the pros are making the decisions that they're making. You know, there's like a certain set of actions that are, you know, reasonable to take in any given situation, but the specific ones that they pick often have to do with, you know, these like really deep mind games that they're playing with their opponents. And so, you know, a lot of the literal actions can seem almost random, especially if you don't already have a really deep understanding of like the literal physical play space of the game. That is, like, you know, if you don't have the movement foresight to be able to understand where certain people can get to at what times, if you don't have good damage foresight to be able to understand exactly how much damage somebody can do at any given moment, then, you know, you'll overestimate or underestimate what is possible and run into real problems, right? The real world is a lot more flexible, I feel like, than League of Legends is, right? You know, like, to an extent, you can continue to train your body and continue to gain strength or dexterity or endurance or something, you know what I mean? In League, your champ is your champ. That's it, you know? I mean, at the end of the day, the game is described by mathematics and by code, right? There is a hard limit on what is possible, and if you know that limit better than somebody else does, it gives you a tremendous advantage. It's very, very different than, you know, your motivation directly influences your literal, like, capability, you know what I mean? Through the effects of practice and what they do for your performance and for your body. You know? So, in conclusion, I'm going to watch more Halo. I think it's important. What do you think?
Well, I think it's especially hard to watch Halo and use that to understand what they do because of how much, like you said, how much Yomi there is going on. Like, if you try to watch like a Halo jungler and try to understand how they decide what their pathing is going to be in the early game, you're fucking screwed. Unless you're below them. Unless you are right below them in terms of skill level and you can understand everything that they do, except like you can like just make the correct assumptions and retrace their thought process to the Yomi level just right below, and then the next level becomes accessible because you see them do it. I think it's tremendously hard because they are not explaining it. Like,
So the way I see it with landing too is kind of difficult because there are some very high level decisions that don't look very high level. Like, for example, if I'm Kai'Sa Tahm Kench versus pushing Ezreal Soraka before level 3, and I'm like, okay, I can push this minion because Soraka just used their Q, but then I have to back off because their Q is going to be up and the minion wave's shoving into me, and I want to be able to farm it under my turret, right? And then, like, as soon as they hit level 3, then we're like, okay, we're level 3, we can fight now, right? And those are, like, 4 very high-level decisions that happen right after another. But, like, if you watch some pro player who's able to execute it every single time, it's not going to look high-level to you. So you're going to go into a game expecting you and your teammate be able to, like, you know, perfectly tether a Soraka Q, walk backwards, and then, like, go hit a bunch of minions and then the Tahm Kench just sits under his turret while you're like, why didn't we all in, right? So it's like, it's good to know the ideal, right? But you also need to know how to get to the ideal.
Yeah. And this, I think, actually brings in some really interesting points about game theory. One of the things that I've been kind of doing on and off for a couple of years now is I've been working my way through the Yale online video course on game theory. And they talk about a lot of things, but, you know, essentially what you're looking at is like a game at its very most basic is like actions and rewards. You know what I mean? And it's like, you know, a lot of times your actions will influence the other person's action or the other person's reward, right? And so, you know, they do those, like, you know, funny little games like the coordination game, right? I'll just do this here actually because it's kind of an amusing one and like a decent example. But so you might have movie A, movie B. I need to add another column. This is actually movie A. And then this is also movie A. And movie B. Right? So the setup for this is you're going on a date with somebody, and you want to go see movie A, they want to go see movie B. But both of you would rather go together than go separately, right? So it's something like, and you know, we'll think of like the columns as being, you know, one person's set of moves, and the rows being as a different set of person's moves. So, you know, let's say the rows guy is the one that actually wants to go to see movie A, right? So he gets a reward of like 2 for going to movie A, and the columns person doesn't want to go to movie A, but if they go to movie A and their partner is there, they're okay with it, right? So it's a 1, right? Then if the rose person goes to movie B, if they don't connect with their partner, everyone's just unhappy as heck, right? So it's just zeros all around, right? So it's set up something to the effect of like this, right? In terms of like rewards, right? So they'd rather go see a movie together that they didn't want to go see than not go together. But they'd rather go see their favorite movie than the other movie, right? And there's a whole bunch of math that you could do with this, basically, and figure out what's the optimal move in terms of figuring out what to do here. But the reason that this particular variant is called the coordination game is because everyone's ability to kind of get what they want is increased if person A and person B can communicate, right? If they can decide to go to movie A together, that's better for both of them. Or if they can decide to go to movie B together, that's better for both of them. If both of them are stubborn and they go to just the movie that they want to go to, then it's super yikes. So you get into stuff like this in League where it's like the optimal move will change depending on what the opponent does. You know what I mean? It's like if the opponent goes to it's like let's say you're person A, right? Like you want to go to movie A, right? But you're okay with going to movie B if person B goes to movie B, right? So you like decide to try to compromise and you go to movie B and then they go to movie A and you're just like, this is the worst. This is the worst outcome. Why have you done this, right? And it's like miscommunications and different understandings of what's optimal can lead to scenarios where you do the thing that would have worked in high elo, in low elo, and it doesn't work because of what the enemy does. And so you need to know how to vary what you do depending on who you're facing and what they're likely to do. And there's, in the decision-making sphere of things, this is pretty much always going to be true, right? But there's also the fundamentals, right, that don't change, either from patch to patch or from elo to elo, right? You have things like CSing, you have things like trading stance, you have things like character movement that are pretty much the same. And,
Yeah.
So watching the pros is good, but you generally want to be watching them for some things, and you don't want to be watching them for some other things. It can be better to watch people.
So people that are like a league or two higher than you.
Yeah, a league or two higher than you. To learn kind of about like what strategy stuff you should be doing differently than what you're doing. But if you're looking to understand mechanically what is possible and what's good, pros are where you want to go 100% of the time. They have the highest performance in that by quite a bit. And their decision-making models are better too, but you just don't see their full decision-making model when you watch them play, because you only get to see what they actually do. You don't get to see all of the things that they decide not to do for various reasons, right? We were talking earlier about like there's this echo is really killing me.
What? Oh, there's an echo?
Yeah, there's an echo.
Shit, sorry. Let me told me earlier.
Yeah, it developed partway through. Yeah, but we were talking earlier about the whole kind of thing of... I've lost my train of thought. It's doomed.
Is it better?
Let's check it out. Yeah, it seems to be better now. Good, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, I totally forget what I was going to say. It'll come back to me. We'll move on. So, they talk at length about what separates deliberate practice from purposeful practice, right? Deliberate practice develops well-understood, already figured-out skills via established training techniques delivered by a coach or teacher familiar with the abilities of experts and how those abilities are developed. I would argue there are probably not any people who are fully qualified to do this in the world yet. You know, like the abilities of top performers are still in many ways pretty magical at the moment, right? You know, we don't really have a great understanding of exactly what Faker did to become Faker. We don't really have an amazing understanding of what Khan did to become Khan. It's all just kind of not been published, not been studied yet. So, you know, already figured out skills? Not so much, right? Established training techniques? Even less so, right? You know, I mean, like, it seems like every team, every player kind of goes through their own different journey to get to exactly where they are. There are a couple of things that are really decidedly the same, right? You know, everyone masses solo queue before they become a pro player, right? You know, there are certain things that definitely are figured out, like you have to do the activity to get better at the activity or something, but the specifics are decidedly not set in stone yet. Deliberate practice takes place outside of the comfort zone, requiring near maximal effort, which is generally not enjoyable, requiring strong motivation. Yeah, this basically applies, I would say, right? You basically only find people at the pro level who are extremely driven to be there. You do not find people who wind up there on accident.
No shit.
Deliberate practice improves specific skills through focused training, using well-defined goals and metrics. I think we're only some of the way there in League of Legends on this one. People like Cyclone and people like us are starting to kind of delve into this, but it's not something that I see many people doing. You know, I mean, like, there are certain goals and metrics that are very well understood. You should maximize your KDA, you should maximize your kill participation, you should maximize your CS, you should maximize your damage per minute, but you don't really train to increase your DPM. You know, you don't train to increase your KDA. That's not like a skill. And there are so many skills that go into these metrics that they don't really tell a very good story about how skilled a player is. You know, it's like it's why I think you end up with analysts who, you know, they have a lot of math to back up what they say, but what they'll say sounds completely silly to somebody who knows what's going on. You know what I mean? And it's like we have not yet, as a community, developed metrics that do a good job of showing people whether they're doing the right thing or wrong thing. In no small part just because the game is really freaking complicated. You know? It's difficult to make metrics for things that are this complicated. Requires full attention and conscious action, and adjustments to practice technique to correct mistakes in the moment. I think this is definitely in full effect in League of Legends. If you're distracted while playing, you're going to get yoinked real hard, real fast. And if you don't figure out how to make adjustments to correct the mistakes that you're making, then you're going to get hard stuck, for sure. So it ends up being full effect. Feedback. Mostly at first from a teacher or a coach, but later on primarily from the students themselves, which requires the development of appropriate mental representations. The game does a decidedly sketchy job of providing feedback about what you did.
Hella sketchy.
Oh, it's so sketchy. Like, you know, you might make the correct play for, in a statistical sense, for your rank, and get punished for it because somebody does something a Yowie level higher that you shouldn't be expecting. You can invade into a jungle that should be there, but because they took some wonky path, it's just not there, and now you're wasting time. There's like all sorts of different things that you can do right and get punished for in League. And you could argue, you know, well, don't. If it's good, do it more. If it's bad, do it less. If it works, do it more. If it doesn't, then do it less. But the problem is that different things don't have consistent outcomes. It's not like tennis where if you hit the ball the same way, it's going to go the same trajectory, right? So much of the game depends on the choices and actions of the enemy that in order to really understand what to do, not only is it a game where there's a lot of counterplay involved and a lot of like back and forth thinking, it's a game of imperfect information too, and so you have this issue too where you don't even know all of the stuff and you have to make these kind of fuzzy predictive I'm going to do this 70% of the time and this 30% of the time. I'm going to do mixed strategies, as the game theorists would call it, in order to maximize my chances of getting a good outcome. Like, do I gank or not gank? Well, no, it's not that simple. You gank 70% of the time, or you gank 30% of the time. 70% of the time, it doesn't do anything. But if you gank